Hello, scholars, and welcome back to the reading of the Book Thief. We are on Enter the Struggler. Now, for a change of scenery. We both had it too easy until now, my friend, don't you think? How about we forget mulching for a minute or two? It will do us some good. Also, it's important to the story. We will travel a little to a secret storage room, and we will see what we see. A guided tour of suffering. To your left, perhaps your right, perhaps even straight ahead, you'll find a small black room. In it sits a Jew. He is scum. He is starving. He is afraid. Please try not to look away. A few hundred miles northwest, in Stuttgart, far from book thieves, mayors' wives, and Himmel Street, a man was sitting in the dark. It was the best place, they decided. It's harder to find a Jew in the dark. He sat on his suitcase, waiting. How many days had it been now? He had only eaten the foul taste of his own hungry breath for what felt like weeks, and still nothing. Occasionally voices wandered past, and sometimes he longed for them to knuckle to the door, to open it, to drag him out into the unbearable light. For now, he could only sit on his suitcase couch, hands under his chin, his elbows burning his thighs. There was sleep, starving sleep, and the irritation of half awakeness, and the punishment of the floor. Ignore the itchy feet. Don't scratch the soles, and don't move too much. Just leave everything as it is, at all cost. It might be time to go soon, like light like a gun, explosive to the eyes. It might be time to go. It might be time. So wake up. Wake up, goddammit. Wake up. The door was opened and shut, and a figure was crouched over him. The hand splashed at the cold waves of his clothes and the grimy currents beneath. A voice came down behind it. Max, it whispered. Max, wake up. His eyes did not do anything that shock normally describes. No snapping, no slapping, no jolt. Those things happen when you wake from a bad dream, not when you wake into one. No, his eyes dragged themselves open, from darkness to dim. It was his body that reacted, shrugging upward and throwing out an arm to grip the air. The voice called him. Sorry it's taken so long. I think people have been watching me. And the man with the identity card took longer than I thought, but there was a pause. It's yours now. Not great quality, but hopefully good enough to get you there if it comes to that. He crouched down and waved a hand at the suitcase. In his other hand, he held something heavy and flat. Come on, off. Max obeyed, standing and scratching. He could feel the tightening of his bones. The card is in this. It was a book. Should put the map in here too, and the directions. And there's a key taped to the inside cover. He clicked open the case as quietly as he could and planted the book like a bomb. I'll be back in a few days. He left a small bag filled with bread, fat, and three small carrots. Next to it was a bottle of water. There was no apology. It's the best I could do. Door open, door shut. Alone again. What came to him immediately then was the sound. Everything was so desperately noisy in the dark when he was alone. Each time he moved, there was the sound of a crease. He felt like a man in a paper suit. The food. Max divided the bread into three parts and set two aside. The one in his hand he immersed himself in, chewing and gulping, forcing it down the dry corridor of his throat. The fat was cold and hard, scaling its way down, occasionally holding on. Big swallows tore them away and sent them below. Then the carrots. Again he sat two aside and devoured the third. The noise was astounding. Surely the Fuhrer himself could hear the sound of the orange crush in his mouth. It broke his teeth with every bite. When he drank, he was quite positive that he was swallowing them. Next time he advised himself, drink first. Later, to his relief, when the echoes left him and he found the courage to check with the figures, Each tooth was still there, intact. He tried for a smile, but it didn't come. He could only imagine a meek contempt and a mouthful of broken teeth. For hours he felt at them. He opened the suitcase and picked up the book. He could not read the title in the dark, and the gamble of striking a match seemed too great right now. When he spoke, it was the taste of a whisper. Please, he said, please. He was speaking to a man he had never met, as well as a few other important details. He knew the man's name, Hans Huberman. Again he spoke to him. To the distant stranger he pleaded, please. Next chapter, the attributes of summer. So there you have it. You're well aware of exactly what was coming to Himmel Street by the end of 1940. I know, you know. Liesel Meminger, however, cannot be put into that category. For the book thief, the summer of that year was simple. It consisted of four main elements, or attributes. At times, she would wonder which was the most powerful. And the nominees are 1. Advancing through the shoulder shrug every night. 2. Reading on the floor of the mayor's library. 3. Playing soccer on Himmel Street. 4. The seizure of a different stealing opportunity. The shoulder shrug, she decided, was excellent. Each night when she calmed herself from her nightmare, she was soon pleased that she was awake and able to read. Few pages? Papa asked her, and Lisa would nod. Sometimes they would complete a chapter the next afternoon down in the basement. The authorities' problem with the book was obvious. The protagonist was a Jew, and he was presented in a positive light. Unforgivable. He was a rich man who was tired of letting life pass him by, what he referred to as the shrugging of his shoulders to the problems and pleasures of a person's time on earth. In the early part of summer in Mulching, as Liesel and Papa made their way through the book, this man was traveling to Amsterdam on business, and the snow was shivering outside. The girl loved that, the shivering snow. That's exactly what it does when it comes down, she told Hans Huberman. They sat together on the bed, Papa half asleep, and the girl wide awake. In the early part of the summer in Mulching, as Liesel and Papa made their way through the book, this man was traveling to Amsterdam. I read that, I'm sorry. Sometimes she watched Papa as he slept, knowing both more and less about him than either of them realized. She often heard him and Mamma discussing his lack of work or talking despondently about Hans going to see their son, only to discover that the young man had left his lodging and was most likely already on his way to war. Schlaf gut, Papa, the girl said at those times. Sleep well. And she slipped around him out of bed to turn off the light. The next attribute, as I mentioned, was the mayor's library. To exemplify that particular situation, we could look to a cool day in late June. Rudy, to put it mildly, was incensed. Who did Lisa Meminger think she was, telling him she had to take care of the washing and ironing alone today? Wasn't he good enough to walk the streets with her? Stop complaining, Sokol, she reprimanded him. I just feel bad. You're missing the game. He looked over his shoulder. Well, if you put it like that, there was a smoozle. You can stick your washing. He ran off and wasted no time joining the team. When Lisa made it to the top of Himmel Street, she looked back just in time to see him standing in front of the nearest makeshift goals. He was waving. Sokol, she laughed. And as she held up her hand, she knew completely that he was simultaneously calling her a samich. I think that that's as close to love as 11-year-olds can get. She started to run to Grand Strasse and the mayor's house. Certainly there was sweat and the wrinkled pants of breath stretching out in front of her, but she was reading. The mayor's wife, having let the girl in for the fourth time, was sitting at the desk, simply watching the books. On the second visit, she had given permission for Liesel to pull it out and go through it, which led to another and another, until up to a half dozen books were stuck to her, either clutched beneath her arm or among the pile that was climbing higher in her remaining hand. On that occasion, as Liesel stood in the cool surrounds of the room, her stomach growled, but no reaction was forthcoming from the mute, damaged woman. She was in her bathrobe again, and although she observed the girl several times, it was never for very long. She usually paid more attention to what was next to her, to something missing. The window was open wide, a square, cool mouth with occasional gusty surges. Liesel sat on the floor. The books were scattered around her. After 40 minutes, she left. Every title was returned to its place. Goodbye, Frau Hermann. The words always came as a shock. Thank you. After which the woman paid her, and she left. Every movement was accounted for, and the book thief ran home. As the summer set in, the beautiful books became warmer, and with every pickup or delivery day, the floor was not as painful. Lisa would sit with a small pile of books next to her, and she'd read a few paragraphs of each, trying to memorize the words. She did not know to ask Papa when she made it home. Later on, as an adolescent, when Lisa wrote about those books, she no longer remembered the titles, not one. Perhaps, had she stolen them, she would have been better equipped. What she did remember was that one of the picture books had had a name written clumsily on the inside cover. The name of the boy? Johann Hermann. Lisa bit down on her lip, but she could not resist it for long. From the floor she turned and looked at the bathrobed woman and made an inquiry. Johann Hermann? She said. Who's that? The woman looked beside her, someone next to the girl's knees. Liesel apologized. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be asking such things. She let the sentence die its own death. The woman's face did not alter, yet somehow she managed to speak. He is nothing now in this world, she explained. He is my Benny. The files of recollection. Oh yes, I definitely remember him. The sky was murky and deep like quicksand. There was a young man parceled up in a barbed wire, like a giant crown of thorns. I untangled him and carried him out. High above the earth we sank together, to our knees. It was just another day, 1918. Apart from everything else, she said, he froze to death. For a moment she played with her hands, and she said it again. He froze to death, I'm sure of it. The mayor's wife was just one of a worldwide brigade. You have seen her before, I'm certain. In your stories, your poems, the screens you like to watch. They're everywhere, so why not here? Why not on a shapely hill in a small German town? It's as good a place to suffer as any. The point is, Ilsa Hermann had decided to make suffering her triumph. When it refused to let her go, she succumbed to it. She embraced it. She could have shot herself, scratched herself, or indulged in other forms of self-mutilation, but she chose what she probably felt was the weakest option, to at least endure the discomfort of the weather. For all Liesel knew, she prayed for summer days that were cold and wet. For the most part, she lived in the right place. When Liesel left that day, she said something with great uneasiness. In translation, two giant words were struggled with, carried out her shoulder, and dropped as a bungling pair at Elsie Herman's feet. They fell out sideways as the girl veered with them, and could no longer sustain their weight. Together they sat on the floor, large and loud and clumsy. Two giant words: I'm sorry. Again, the mayor's wife watched the space next to her, a blank page face. For what? She asked, but time had elapsed by then. The girl was already well out of the room. She was nearly at the front door when she heard it. Liesel stopped, but she chose not to go back, preferring to make her way noiselessly from the house and down the steps. She took in the view of mulching before disappearing down into it, and she pitied the mayor's wife for quite a while. At times, Liesel wondered if she should simply leave the woman alone. But Elsa Herman was too interesting, and the pull of the books was too strong. Once, words had rendered Liesel useless, but now, when she sat on the floor with the mayor's wife at her husband's desk, she felt an innate sense of power. It happened every time she deciphered a new word or pieced together a sentence. She was a girl in Nazi Germany. How fitting that she was discovering the power of words. And how awful and yet exhilarating it would feel many months later when she would unleash the power of this newfound discovery the very moment the mayor's wife let her down. How quickly the pity would leave her, and how quickly it would spill over into something else completely. Now, though, in the summer of 1940, she could not see what lay ahead in more ways than one. She was witness only to her sorrowful woman with a room full of books whom she enjoyed visiting. That was all. It was part two of her existence that summer. Part three, thank God, was little more lighthearted. Himmel Street Soccer. Allow me to play you a picture. Feet scuffing road, the rush of boyish breath, shouted shouted words, here, this way, Scheisse. The course bounce of ball on road. All were present on Himmel Street, as well as the sound of apologies as summer further intensified. The apologies belonged to Liesel Nebinger. They were directed at Tommy Mueller. By the start of July, she finally managed to convince him that she wasn't going to kill him. Since the beatings she'd handed him in the previous November, Tommy was still frightened to be around her. In the soccer meetings on Himmel Street, he kept well clear. You never know when she might snap, he confided in Rudy, half twitching, half speaking. In Liesel's defense, she never gave up on trying to put him at ease. It disappointed her that she'd successfully made peace with Ludwig Spiekel and not with the innocent Tommy Mueller. He still cowered slightly whenever he saw her. How could I know you were smiling for me that day? She asked him repeatedly. She'd even put a few stints at goalie for him, until everyone else on the team begged him to go back in. Get back in there, a boy named Harold Mollenhauer finally ordered him. You're useless. This was after Tommy tripped him up as he was about to score. He would have awarded himself a penalty, but for the fact that they were on the same side. Liesel came back and would somehow always end up opposing Rudy. They would tackle and trip each other, call each other names. Rudy would commentate. She can't get around him this time. The stupid Samich Arschgrabler. She hasn't got a hope. He seemed to enjoy calling Liesel an ass scratcher. It was one of the joys of childhood. Another of the joys, of course, was stealing. Part 4, summer 1940. In fairness, there were many things that brought Rudy and Liesel together, but it was the stealing that cemented their friendship completely. was brought about by one opportunity, and it was driven by one inescapable force: Rudy's hunger. The boy was permanently dying for something to eat. On top of the rationing situation, his father's business wasn't doing so well of late. The threat of Jewish competition was taken away, but so were the Jewish customers. The Steiners were scratching things together to get by. Like many other people on the Himmel Street side of the town, they needed to trade. Lisa would have given him some food from her place, but there wasn't an abundance of it there either. Mama usually made pea soup. On Sunday nights, she'd cook it, and not just enough for one or two repeat performances. She made enough pea soup to last until the following Saturday. Then on Sunday, she'd cook another one: pea soup, bread, sometimes a small portion of potatoes or meat. You ate it up, and you didn't ask for more, and you didn't complain. At first, they did things to try to forget about it. Rudy wouldn't be hungry if they played soccer on the street, or if they took bikes from his brother and sister and rode to Alex Steiner's shop, or visited Lisa's pop up, if he was working that particular day. Hans Huberman would sit with them and tell jokes in the last light of afternoon. With the arrival of a few hot days, another distraction was learning to swim in the Yampa River. The water was still a little too cold, but they went anyway. Come on, Rudy coaxed her in. Just here. It isn't so deep here. She couldn't see the giant hole she was walking into and sank straight to the bottom. Dog paddling saved her life, despite nearly choking on the swollen intake of water. You sockle, she accused him, which collapsed onto the riverbank. Rudy made certain to keep well away. He'd seen what he did. He'd seen what he did to her, what she did to Ludwig Schmeichel. You can swim now, can't you? Which didn't particularly cheer her up as she marched away. Her hair was pasted to the side of her face, and snot was flowing from her nose. He called after her. Does this mean I don't get a kiss for teaching you? Sockle. The nerve of him. It was inevitable. The depressing pea soup and Rudy's hunger finally drove them to thievery. It inspired their attachment to an older group of kids who stole from the farmers, fruit stealers. After a game of soccer, both Liesel and Rudy learned the benefits of keeping their eyes open. Sitting on Rudy's front step, they noticed Fritz Hammer, one of the older counterparts, eating an apple. It was of the Klar variety, ripening in July and August, and it looked magnificent in his hand. Three or four more of them clearly bulged in his jacket pockets. They wandered closer. Where'd you get those? Rudy asked. The boy only grinned at first. Shh! And he stopped. He then proceeded to pull an apple from his pocket and toss it over. Just look at that, he warned them. Don't eat it. The next time they saw the same boy wearing the same jacket, on a day that was too warm for it, they followed him. He led them toward the upstream section of the Yampa River. It was close to where Liesel sometimes read with her papa when she was first learning. A group of 5 boys, some lanky, a few short and lean, stood, waiting. There were a few such groups in Moulton at the time, some with members as young as 6. The leader of this particular outfit was an agreeable 15-year-old criminal named Arthur Berg. He looked around and saw the two 11-year-olds dangling off the back. Und? He asked. And? I'm starving, Rudy replied. And he's fast, said Liesel. Berg looked at her. I don't recall asking your opinion. He was teenage tall, had a long neck. Pimples were gathered in peer groups on his face. But I like you. He was friendly in a smart mouth adolescent way. Isn't this the one who beat up your brother, Andal? Word had certainly made its way around. A good hiding transcends the divides of age. Another boy, one of the short, lean ones, with shaggy blond hair and ice-colored skin, looked over. I think so. Rudy confirmed it. It is. Andy Schmeichel walked across and studied her, up and down, his face pensive before breaking into a gaping smile. Great work, kid. He even slapped her among the bones of her back, catching a sharp piece of shoulder blade. I'd get whipped for it if I did it myself. Arthur had moved on to Rudy. And you're the Jesse Owens one, aren't you? Rudy nodded. Clearly, said Arthur. You're an idiot. But you're our kind of idiot. Come in. They were in. When they reached the farm, Liesel and Rudy were thrown a sack. Arthur Berg gripped his own burlap bag. He ran a hand through his mild strands of hair. Either of you ever stolen before? Of course, Rudy certified. All the time. He was not very convincing. Lisa was more specific. I sold 2 books, at which Arthur laughed in 3 short snorts. His pimples shifted position. Can't eat books, sweetheart. From there, they all examined the apple trees, who stood in long twisted rows. Arthur Berg gave the orders. One, he said, don't get caught on the fence. If you get caught on the fence, you get left behind. Understood? Everyone nodded or said yes. Two, one in the tree, one below. Someone has to collect. He rubbed his hands together. He was enjoying this. Three, if you see someone coming, you call out loud enough to wake the dead. And we all run. Right, Dig? Right, Dig. It was a chorus. 2 debutante apple thieves whispering, Lisa, are you sure? Do you still want to do this? Look at the barbed wire, Rudy. It's so high. No, no. Look. Throw all you throw the sack on. See like them. All right, come on then. I can't. Hesitation. Rudy, I move it, Samich. He pushed her toward the fence, threw the empty sack on the wire, and they climbed over, running toward the others. Rudy made his way up to the closest tree and started flinging down the apples. Liesel stood below, putting them into the sack. By the time it was full, there was another problem. How do we get back over the fence? The answer came when they noticed Arthur Berg climbing as close to the fence post as possible. The wire stronger there. Rudy pushed. He threw the sack over, made Liesel go first, then landed beside her on the other side, among the fruit that spilled from the bag. Next to them, the long legs of Arthur Berg stood watching in amazement. Not bad, landed the voice from above. Not bad at all. When they made it back to the river, hidden among the trees, he took the sack and gave Liesel and Rudy a dozen apples between them. Good work, was his final comment on the matter. That afternoon, before they returned home, Liesel and Rudy consumed 6 apples apiece within half an hour. At first, they entertained thoughts of sharing the fruit at their respective homes, but there was considerable danger in that. They didn't particularly relish the opportunity of explaining just where the fruit had come from. Lisa even thought that perhaps she could get away with it with only telling Papa, but she didn't want him thinking that he had a compulsive criminal on his hands. So she ate. On the river bank, where she learned to swim, each apple was disposed of. Unaccustomed to such luxury, they knew it was likely they'd be sick. They ate anyway. Samich! Mom abused her that night. Why are you vomiting so much? Maybe it's the pea soup, Lisa suggested. That's right, Papa echoed. He was over at the window again. It must be. I feel a bit sick myself. Who asked you, Sokol? Quickly she turned back to face the vomiting Samich. Well, what is it? What is it, you filthy pig? But Liesel? She said nothing. The apples, she thought happily. The apples. And she vomited one more time. For luck. Questions for this will be posted along with this story. We'll talk again tomorrow.